If consciousness crosses worlds, who owns a life? And what is the moral cost of waking up?
The most frightening possibility isn't that dreams are real. It's that someone else may be living your life while you sleep.
Night, an elderly Caucasian male neuroscientist thought he was dreaming. Every morning, they buried him.
I used to teach that dreams were what the brain did when it turned the lights down. The cortex free-running on its own priors, the hippocampus replaying yesterday's scraps as if shuffling a deck, the limbic system lifting the velvet rope so emotion could roam. In my lectures, I would say projection and mean it with affection, like a planetarium show is projection. Beautiful, immersive, convincing, but ultimately light thrown on a dome. I built a career on the dome. Somnus Laboratory, second floor of the medical school, keycard access, humming racks, the polite smell of disinfectant and coffee. We collected sleep like meteorologists collect weather. We measured REM as if measuring rain. We put numbers on the unseeable. Theta power, PGO spikes, high-density EEG coherence, the little phasic twitches of eyes that mean the dream is moving. In the beginning, I was proud of how clean my skepticism was, how I could talk about consciousness without touching the word soul. I liked my mysteries solvable. I liked my world to be one world. Then the dreams began to behave badly, less like weather and more like geography, less like projection and more like a place you return to, a place that continues when you leave. The first time it happened, I didn't even recognize it as a problem. It felt like a graduate student flex of imagination, a mind showing off its generative models. I fell asleep in my own lab during a late-night calibration, cheek pressed to the edge of my desk, the Somnus erased gel still tacky on my scalp, the monitor still displaying my own signals because I'd left myself plugged in like a self-portrait. I remember the moment the dream came online because my senses didn't fade in. They snapped. The air was cold and tasted faintly of metal, as if snow were coming. I stood in a street paved with dark stone that held the day's warmth like skin. A city rose around me, tall, narrow buildings with balconies like layered shelves, windows lit in amber panes, cables strung between rooftops as if the city had been mended in a hurry. There was water somewhere nearby, not the ocean but a river, and the river had a voice. Above, the sky looked wrong in a way I could not immediately name, like a familiar face with one feature shifted by a millimeter. The stars were too steady, too numerous, too close. People passed me carrying sacks of grain, bundles of cloth, their breath visible. They moved with the purpose of people who have somewhere to be and a history of going there. A boy with a red scarf bumped my shoulder and said, "Sorry, sir," without looking up. No one stared at me like a dream character noticing the dreamer. No one paused to ask why I wore a lab hoodie and soft-soled shoes that squeaked on stone. They treated me as though I belonged. I turned slowly, trying to catch the seams, the cartoonish distortions, the places where my mind would normally give itself away, and I found none. The buildings had backs. The alleyways had trash. The trash had texture. Even the graffiti looked like it had been painted by hands that got tired. In my field, we talk about dream bizarreness as a signature of weakened reality monitoring, the prefrontal cortex downshifting, the brain tolerating contradictions. This was the opposite. This was coherent to the point of arrogance. I walked until I reached a square where a fountain ran dark with mineral water, and there, sitting on the fountain's lip, turning a coin between her fingers, was a woman who looked up at me with the kind of recognition that makes your stomach drop. "Eli," she said, as if I'd been late. "You came back." I opened my mouth and heard my own voice come out without the scientist's caution. "Have we met?" She snorted, not offended, just amused. "You always ask that. You're always new when you come. Sit. Tell me the dream you came from this time." It should have been a clue that she used the word dream for my world, the way I would later learn they all did. At the time, I only felt the small thrill of being seen by a figment that could improvise. I sat beside her. The coin flashed between her knuckles with practiced ease. She had ink on her fingertips like someone who lived among paper. "What's your name?" I asked. "Sena," she said. Archivist for the South Stack, which you always forget. And you're Eli, which you always remember like it's stitched into your tongue. She leaned closer, the smell of smoke and cedar on her hair. Do you remember what you promised me last time? I laughed, because it was absurd, because it was a dream trying to guilt me into continuity, because I'd read too much Jung as a teenager and assumed every woman in a dream was an anima with a moral. No, I admitted. Then you're still you, she said, and her smile was a little sad. You promised. You'd come before the frost market ended. You said you'd help me find a name in the old registries. You said you weren't going to vanish in the middle of a sentence again. I told myself I must have had a similar dream before and forgotten it, a déjà vu loop, a brain recycling its own plot. Yet when she said vanish, I felt something like pressure behind my sternum, not guilt but an echo of something that had happened. I asked where we were. Marrow, she said, as if it should mean something. South Square. Don't look so blank. You stood right here and argued with Oren about the watchman's jurisdiction. Oren? The detective, she said, rolling the coin to her thumb. If you're back, he'll want to see you. He says your disappearances are a case. She said it with the tiredness of someone who had been living with an impossible problem long before I decided it was interesting. I tried to shift the conversation to my own familiar ground, asked about their calendar, their sleep, whether they had brains like ours, whether they had dreams, because that's what I do when I'm frightened. I translate fear into variables. Sena answered with impatience. We sleep, she said. We dream. We wake. We don't vanish. She flicked the coin and caught it. That part is only you. The first episode ended like most dreams end, not with a scene change, but with a force, like a hand at the back of the head. I was mid-sentence, trying to explain neuroscience in terms she might accept, trying to tell her that consciousness is a process, that I didn't choose to vanish any more than I chose to digest, when the edge of the square began to soften. The fountain's sound stretched, as if the pitch were being pulled down. Sena's eyes widened in a way that made my throat close. No, she said, and grabbed my wrist so hard I felt her nails bite. Don't you dare! Her grip was real. Her panic was real. I tried to hold onto the cold stone under my palms, tried to anchor myself with sensation like a meditation exercise, and watched my own hands go translucent as if I were being erased from a photograph. The last thing I heard was Sena shouting my name, not as a symbol but as a person leaving her. Then my eyes snapped open on my desk, the lab's fluorescent lights buzzing, my mouth full of the taste of copper and sleep. The Somnus Array monitor had dutifully recorded my REM, a clean burst, a signature of high-amplitude theta, the telltale sawtooth waves. I sat up so fast the electrode cap tugged at my hair. My wrist hurt. A crescent of red marks, 4 half-moons like tiny bruises, ringed the skin where Sena had dug in. I stared at them until my eyes watered. In the morning meeting, I tried to tell myself a simple story. I'd dreamt vividly, I'd thrashed, I'd scratched myself. But the marks were too neat, too aligned, too much like a hand. I could have ignored them, filed them under the brain's talent for coincidence, except I could still smell smoke and cedar on my sleeve, faint but present, the way a dream smell shouldn't persist because olfactory bulb activation in REM is usually dampened. I went home and tried to live my day as if I hadn't just been in a city that wasn't mine. It didn't work. That night I did what I always told my participants not to do. I tried to force a dream. I drank no alcohol. I avoided screens. I set alarms for the early morning to catch myself in REM. I laid in bed and repeated Merrow like a mantra. When I finally fell asleep, I didn't drift into random imagery. I arrived. It was dusk in Merrow, the square empty, the fountain running. My feet stood exactly where they had stood before. The cold air hit my lungs like truth. Sena wasn't there. For a moment I felt foolish relief. Maybe this was my mindset, and it hadn't loaded the characters. Then a hand clamped on my shoulder from behind. Don't move, a voice said, and don't you disappear on me this time. I turned and saw a man with a coat cut like something between a uniform and a long jacket, collar up, eyes sharp in a tired face. He held a small notebook and a pencil. Elias Hart, he said, pronouncing it as if reading from a file. My real name, the one on my faculty ID, also known as Eli. You will come with me. Who are you? I managed. Orrinvel, he said. Mero Watch, Special Matters, Missing Persons. He looked me up and down like a surgeon assessing a wound. You've been gone 19 days. Do you have any idea what your vanishing does to people? 19 days, I echoed, because in my bed it had been one night. Orrin's mouth tightened. He does that, he said to someone behind him, as if I weren't there. Play stupid. Or maybe he is. He flipped the notebook open, showed me a page covered in tight handwriting and little diagrams that looked like street maps. We have witness statements, he said. We have petitions. We have a funeral record. We have a child who won't sleep because he thinks he'll vanish too. We have a woman who keeps a chair by her stove for a man who appears and disappears like a plague. He pointed with the pencil. We have Sena. And we have you. My dream brain should have turned this into symbolism, the detective as my superego, the missing persons as my neglected responsibilities. Instead, Orrin's anger felt directed at me as an agent, not an archetype. I followed him because what else do you do when a world insists you're accountable? He led me through streets that were consistent with the night before, down alleys I didn't recognize but that obeyed a geography that held in my mind like a real map. People watched us pass. Some faces tightened with resentment. A woman spat near my feet and said, "Ghost." A man with a cane made a sign over his chest as if warding off bad luck. When Orrin pulled me into an office that smelled of old paper and boiled tea, I saw on the wall a board of pinned notices. One was a drawing of me. Not perfect, but unmistakable. The shape of my nose, the tiredness around my eyes, the hoodie rendered as a cloak because their artist didn't know modern clothing. Under it, in block letters, a word I had never seen but somehow understood. Vanished. Orrin sat me down hard in a chair. "Speak," he said. "Where do you go?" "I wake up," I said, before I could stop myself. He stared as if I'd told him I flew to the moon. "Wake up where?" "Not here," I said. "In another world." I expected him to laugh. Orrin didn't laugh. He turned his pencil between his fingers slowly, as if resisting the urge to snap it. "We have a term for people who claim to leave," he said. "Liars." "I'm not lying," I said, and I heard the tremor in my voice, the way my own certainty sounded like madness. "I'm a scientist." "In your other world," Orrin said, "do scientists also abandon their obligations without warning?" "I don't choose it," I said. "Sleep takes me." Orrin leaned forward. "Then learn to stay awake," he said, and his cruelty was born of desperation. "Or die. At least death makes sense." Sena entered the office then, breathless, cheeks flushed from running. She stopped when she saw me, as if my body were a question. For a heartbeat, her face did something complicated, relief braided with anger, braided with grief. She crossed the room in 3 strides and slapped me so hard my ears rang. "Don't!" she said when I opened my mouth. "Don't you dare apologize like it's weather. People have held you in their arms in this city. People have planned their days around you. I have rewritten my whole life around the possibility that you will return, and you do. And you look at me like I'm a book you misplaced." Tears stood in her eyes but did not fall. "Orrin," she said without looking away from me, "don't let him leave again." Orrin sighed. "If I could lock a man inside his own skin, Sena, I'd have done it." He turned to me. "You will come tomorrow," he said. "You will come the day after. You will come until we understand what you are. You will not vanish." I wanted to say I couldn't promise. I wanted to say the promise was the problem. But Sena's eyes pinned me. So I did what humans do when cornered by another human's pain. I promised anyway. "I'll come back," I said. "I swear." The moment the word swear left my mouth, the pressure behind my sternum returned, heavier now, as if the universe itself disliked oaths made across worlds. I spent that night in Mero in a back room of the watch office, watched by a bored guard with a scar across his lip. I tried not to fall asleep. I pinched myself. I walked circles. I recited my grant proposal in my head. Somewhere near dawn, the air in the room grew thin, and my body began to buzz like static. The guard looked up from his cards. "No!" he said. voice suddenly alarmed. No! No! He lunged for me and grabbed my sleeve, and for an instant, his hand was on cloth, his fingers tightening, and then his grip closed on nothing. I watched his face as I faded. It wasn't just fear, it was betrayal. The last thing I saw was him stumbling backward, staring at his empty fist as if he'd just watched a man die. I woke in my bed with my heart punching my ribs, sweat cold on my spine. It was morning, sunlight on my bedroom wall, the ordinary world. Except my sleeve, my real sleeve, had a smear of dark dust at the cuff, gritty like powdered stone. I rubbed it between my fingers. It did not vanish. I brought it to my nose. It smelled faintly of mineral water. I did not go to the lab that day. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote until my hand cramped. Not a dream journal in the casual sense, a field report. Mero, architecture, language, fragments, social structures, the way the sky's stars fixed into patterns that didn't match any constellation I knew. I drew the fountain, the square, Orin's office. I wrote down the word vanished in their script as best I could, and beneath it I wrote a question that felt obscene. If that place continues, if those people continue, what have I been doing to them each morning? The rational part of me tried to drag the question back into known frameworks, recurrent dreams, dissociative states, a brain under stress generating a persistent narrative world. But the bruises and the dust sat on the table like stubborn evidence. So I did what I always do when the world misbehaves. I designed an experiment. In Somnus Lab, we had a protocol for lucid dream communication. Subjects trained to signal with left-right eye movements upon achieving lucidity, a trick borrowed from classic REM studies. We paired that with machine learning models that could classify sleep stages in real time. I told myself I could use the same closed-loop approach to test Mero. If it was my brain's projection, I should be able to manipulate it by manipulating my physiology. If it was an external plane, it might resist. I also needed something else, corroboration. A world only I could see would never be evidence. It would be pathology. I chose Mara Lynn, my sharpest graduate student, the kind who read philosophy for fun and didn't flinch at weird hypotheses as long as they were testable. I didn't tell her the whole story at first, only that I'd been having a recurring dream with unusual stability and I wanted to see if she could enter it. Like shared dreaming? She asked, eyebrows lifted. There's no good evidence for that, I said automatically, then caught myself. I know. That's why. I gave her my map of South Square and described Sena and Orin and the fountain and the smell of metal in the air. I told her one specific thing. If she saw a boy with a red scarf, she should ask him the word for river. Why? She asked. Because I don't know it, I said. If you come back with the same answer I later hear, it's a data point. Mara grinned like I'd handed her contraband. We fitted her with the portable EEG cap, the kind we used for home sleep studies, and synced it to her phone. We set up a simple code. If she became lucid, she would signal with eye movements, then try to find the fountain. I went home and did the same, electro-gel cold on my scalp, wires tucked under my pillow like a nest of snakes. That night I arrived in Mero with an urgency that felt like hunger. Orin's office, the guard with the scar, their faces when I vanished. I ran through streets until I reached South Square. Sena sat on the fountain's lip, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the water as if waiting for it to speak. When she saw me, she didn't smile. You came back, she said, and her voice held no relief, only the exhausted recognition of someone who has been hurt so often she can't afford hope. How long? I asked. 2 more days since Orin took you, she said. They've been saying your name like it's a curse. Sena, I began, and then I stopped because there was a girl standing near the fountain who did not belong to my previous nights. Short hair, nose ring, the subtle stiffness of someone wearing a body that still felt like a borrowed coat. She wore Mero's layered clothing, but her eyes were modern, searching, skeptical, alive with analysis. She looked at me and her face did something like recognition and confusion at once. Mara. My throat went tight. She walked toward me and said in a voice carefully neutral, Dr. Hart! Senya's head snapped toward her. Who is this? She demanded. Mara swallowed. I'm... She looked at me for help. In my ear, somewhere deep, I felt the faint buzzing sensation that in the lab meant my EEG had flagged lucidity. I forced my voice steady. "She's from where I go," I said to Sena. "She's proof." Mara's gaze flicked between us. "This is," she whispered, "this is real." I wanted to laugh and cry and shove my skepticism out the window. Instead, I said, "Ask the boy with the red scarf the word for river." Mara blinked, then nodded, slipping into experiment mode like a diver into water. She turned, scanned the square, and there he was, red scarf, carrying a basket of apples. Mara intercepted him. "Hey," she said, and the boy looked up, annoyed, then curious. She pointed toward the sound of water beyond the square. "What do you call that?" The boy shrugged like the question was stupid. He said a word, sharp at the start, liquid at the end, that I had never heard, and yet my brain tried to translate as rill and failed. Mara repeated it twice, lips shaping unfamiliar phonemes. She turned back to me, eyes wide. "Rivan," she said softly. It's Rivan." I hadn't told her any such word because I didn't know it. My skin prickled. Senya watched us like watching two people speak in a code you're not meant to hear. "What game is this?" she asked. "It's not a game," I said, and I surprised myself by sounding angry. "It's me trying to understand what I'm doing to you." Sena's mouth twisted. "You're doing nothing," she snapped. "You're leaving." Mara looked stricken. "They know," she whispered to me. "They know you disappear. They remember," I said. Orin appeared then as if summoned by the tension. He saw Mara and his hand went automatically to the baton at his belt. "Another one," he said, voice flat with dread. "How many of you are there?" Mara flinched. "I'm not—" Orin cut her off. "Does she vanish too?" he demanded of me. "I don't know," I said. "We're testing." Orin's eyes narrowed. "Testing," he repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "While people bury you." He stepped closer until his face was inches from mine. "Listen," he said, low enough that Senna and Mara had to lean to hear. "If you're truly from elsewhere, if you truly cannot help the leaving, then your coming here is cruelty. Stop." I opened my mouth to argue, science, discovery, consciousness, then saw Sena's face, the bruised hope, and realized Orin's statement was the cleanest ethical framing I'd heard. If I couldn't stay, maybe I shouldn't come at all. The thought hit me like vertigo because it implied giving up a world that had already begun to feel like a moral obligation. It also implied abandoning Senna, who had become real to me in a way no dream character ever had. Mara shifted beside me. "Dr. Hart," she murmured. "My eyes—" She pressed her fingers to her temples. Her body started to vibrate with the same static I felt before waking. "Oh, God," she said, fear breaking her careful neutrality. "I think I'm—" Her outline flickered. Sena gasped. Orin swore and grabbed Mara's arm. "Hold her!" he barked. I grabbed her other arm. For an instant, her grip was solid, her fingers cold. She looked at me, terror and wonder in equal measure. "They'll think you're insane," she said. "They'll think I'm—" And then she vanished. Not faded, vanished. One blink, she was there. The next, the space between my hands was empty air. Orin staggered as if punched. Sena made a sound I hadn't heard from her yet, something raw and animal. I stood with my arms still curved around nothing, the way people stand after a body is yanked from their grasp. "Now you see," Orin said hoarsely, and I realized the anger in his voice had cracked into something like grief. "Now you see what you do." I woke alone in my bed, heart racing, and for a moment I couldn't tell which ceiling was mine. I grabbed my phone. The EEG app showed I'd been in REM for 11 minutes. In the lab, Mara's phone would show the same. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring, breathless. "I was there," she said without preamble. "Elias, I was there." Hearing my own first name in her mouth instead of Dr. Hart felt like a line crossed. "Say the word," I said. "The river word." "Revan," she said, and I felt my body fill with a cold that was not fear but awe. We were silent for a long time. Finally she said, "What do we do with this?" I laughed, a short broken sound. We ruin our careers, I said. The next day I told Priya Mehta, my closest colleague in Somnus Lab, because secrets corrode you and because Priya's mind was a scalpel. She listened while I described Mero and Sena and Orin and the vanishings, while I showed her the dust sample in a little vial and the bruises on my wrist and the EEG traces synced to Mara's. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, and for a moment I saw something like fear behind her professional composure. Then she did what good scientists do. She offered the simplest explanation that preserved the laws of the universe. Shared dreaming is not impossible as a subjective experience, she said carefully. There are studies on dream incorporation, mutual priming. You could have influenced Mara with suggestion. I didn't know the word, I said. Language can be confabulated, she said. Brains love making up words that feel plausible. I slid my notebook across to her, the one where I'd drawn Mero's script. Sena used that word, I said, before Mara did. Priya's eyes tracked the page, then lifted to mine. Elias, she said gently, and the gentleness hurt. You're under enormous stress. The grant renewal, the insomnia, I am not psychotic, I snapped. Priya flinched, then hardened. I didn't say psychotic, she said. I said stressed. But if you want me to say the other word, I will. You are describing a belief that violates consensus. Reality. That is a diagnostic criterion for something. I stared at her, heat rising in my face. So if I see something real that the consensus hasn't caught up with, I said, that makes me ill. It makes you vulnerable, she said. It makes you a person whose brain might be looking for patterns and finding them. She stood and put a hand on my shoulder. Let's replicate. Properly. Controlled. And in the meantime, you need sleep that isn't a battleground. Sleep, the cruel joke. The more Mero demanded of me, the more my waking life began to erode. I couldn't sit in meetings without hearing Sena's voice asking what I promised. I couldn't run a seminar without imagining Orin's notebook filled with evidence of my absence. I began to dread bedtime, not because of nightmares, but because of responsibility. The ethical calculus inverted. Normally we think of sleep as rest, the innocent surrender. For me, sleep became the moment I walked into someone else's life, made commitments I couldn't keep, then vanished like a thief. I started taking modafinil, then doubling the dose. I started using the lab's transcranial alternating current stimulator on myself, timing theta frequency stimulation to disrupt REM onset, turning my own brain into a machine to be hacked. I told myself it was just to stabilize my schedule. In truth, it was cowardice. I wanted to avoid Mero because Mero had begun to feel like a courtroom. It didn't work. The brain is stubborn. The more I fought sleep, the more it ambushed me. Micro sleeps in the elevator, hypnagogic flashes while reading papers. Once, during a lecture on predictive coding, my vision stuttered, and for half a second, the lecture hall's windows turned amber and the air tasted of metal. I gripped the podium until my knuckles whitened. Students watched me with polite concern. I finished the lecture on autopilot, then went to my office and vomited into the trash can from sheer disorientation. That night, exhausted past resistance, I fell asleep in my clothes and arrived in Mero like a man walking into a house he'd burned down. South Square was crowded. Not with market stalls this time, but with people holding candles, their faces solemn in the flickering light. A banner hung between two buildings, cloth painted with my sketched face and the word vanished in enormous letters. My stomach dropped. Sena stood at the front, candle in hand, hair braided back, her expression carved from grief. Orin stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw clenched. When he saw me appear at the edge of the crowd, he went very still. A murmur rippled through the people like wind through dry leaves. Someone shouted, "Ghost!" Someone else shouted, "Liar!" A child began to cry. Sena's candle trembled. She took one step toward me, then stopped as if afraid I would evaporate if touched. "Eli," she said, voice hoarse. "They held a wake for you," Orin said, and there was a kind of shame in his anger now, as if he'd become complicit in absurdity. "They said it was to help people grieve. You know what it did? It made your leaving official. People started acting like you were dead, and that—" He gestured helplessly at the crowd. "That changes a city. A man pushed forward, holding a small wreath of dried flowers. "My sister," he said to me, eyes bright with fury. "She spoke to you the day before you vanished. You told her you'd help her get medicine for her lungs. She waited at the apothecary every morning. She died last week, do you understand? She died waiting for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth, but no apology could reach across that gap, because the gap was time itself. "I didn't know," I whispered. "Of course you didn't," the man spat. "Because you were gone." Senya stepped between us, not protecting me so much as protecting the crowd from the sight of her own conflicted loyalty. "Stop," she said, and her voice carried. "He is here now. If you want to accuse, accuse. If you want to mourn, mourn. But don't pretend he is a ghost when he is flesh." She looked at me, eyes glassy. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them where you go." I swallowed. "I go to sleep," I said loudly, hating how stupid it sounded. "In my world, when night comes, we lose consciousness. We dream. I don't control it. When I wake, I am not here. I am elsewhere." The crowd's murmurs rose into laughter in some corners, into angry shouts in others. A woman screamed, "So just don't sleep!" Oren's face twisted. "As if," he muttered. Sena took my hand suddenly, as if staking a claim, and pulled me through the crowd toward the South Stack, the archive building she'd mentioned before. People reached for me as we passed, some to touch, as if confirming solidity, some to slap, some to grab. Sena didn't let go. The archive's interior smelled of ink and dust and damp wood. Rows of shelves rose like cathedral aisles. Senya led me to a small desk cluttered with scrolls and bound volumes. "Sit," she said. "You promised me names." I stared at the papers. "Sena," I said, voice cracking. "People died while I was gone." "People die while you are here too," she snapped, then immediately softened, as if the harshness was a reflex she regretted. "Marrow is not paused for your visits, Eli. It keeps moving. That is what makes your leaving cruel. It is not that you vanish, it is that we continue without you." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "I told myself you couldn't help it. I told Orin you weren't a monster, but now I don't know what you are." I reached for her hand. "I'm trying to understand," I said. "In my world, I study consciousness. I study how the brain creates a sense of reality. I thought this—" I gestured weakly at the shelves, the lamplight, the solidity of wood under my fingers. "I thought this was my brain. But if you continue without me, if you remember, if time passes—" "Then what?" Sena demanded. "Then you are guilty," she said quietly, and the quietness was worse than anger. "Because if this is real, then waking up is choosing to leave us." The accusation lodged in me like a splinter. That night in Merrow, I did not sleep, not because I could control it, but because sleep there felt different. I didn't feel the physiological drag. Instead, I felt a countdown I couldn't see, a tension in the fabric of the world that tightened as if morning were a tide pulling me away. I stayed with Sena in the archive until the lamplight dimmed and the city quieted. We worked through registries, her finger tracing old names, mine reading letters I somehow understood, though I'd never learned their script. It was a translation that happened in my skull, like my brain was mapping their symbols onto concepts, doing what it always does, making meaning. We found the name she wanted, an ancestor, a missing record, a thread of identity she'd been searching for. Sena's breath caught. For a moment, her face lit with something like joy. She looked at me and said, "You did it." Then she frowned, as if remembering the terms of the universe. "Will you be here when I wake tomorrow?" "I don't know," I said, and the honesty felt like failure. Sena's eyes filled again. "Then don't promise," she whispered. "Don't promise if you can't stay. I am tired of burying you." I wanted to say that in my world, promises are social glue, how we build trust, how we pretend time is stable. I wanted to say I had built my entire identity on being a man whose word held. Instead, I sat with the unbearable thought that my word could be murder. Near dawn, the static began. Sena watched my face as if she could see the shimmer. "Is it happening?" she asked, voice tight. I nodded. She took a deep breath, then did something that would later become the pivot of my life. She wrapped a thin cord around my wrist and tied it in a knot so tight it hurt. The cord was braided from dark fiber with a small metal bead threaded on it, stamped with a symbol. "If you go," she said, "take this. If you wake in your world, keep it. If you can bring something of us there, maybe you can prove to them you are not mad. Maybe you can find a way back that doesn't tear." I stared at the cord. "I can't bring objects from dreams," I said automatically, then stopped. "I don't know what I can do." Senya tightened the knot. "Try," she said. The world thinned. Senya's hand clung to mine. "Eli," she said urgently, and there was something like prayer in her voice. "If you are a person, then act like one. Don't let our lives be your entertainment." The cord on my wrist burned like a brand as I faded. I woke in my bed with my arm outstretched toward empty air. My wrist hurt. I looked down. The cord was there, dark fiber, metal bead cold against my skin. For a long minute I couldn't breathe. I held my wrist up to the light, expecting it to dissolve, expecting my brain to wake fully and correct the hallucination. It remained. I tugged it. It tightened. The bead stamped with a symbol that matched my notebook scribbles. I sat on the edge of my bed and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. In the lab, later that day, I showed Priya. She stared at the cord as if it were a bomb. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Mero," I said, and my voice shook with vindication and terror. Priya reached out, touched the bead with one finger, then recoiled as if burned. "This is," she began, then stopped because she didn't have a category. "We need materials analysis," she said, and I heard the excitement in her fear. "We need to isolate variables. We need to talk about ethics," I said, and the words surprised me. Priya blinked. "Ethics? If Mero is real," I said, "then I'm not just dreaming. I'm entering a place. I'm interacting with people. I'm leaving them." I couldn't say the rest. Murder without tasting bile. Priya's eyes softened with something like pity. "Elias," she said, "even if it's real, you're not causing harm by waking. You can't be responsible for physiology." "Tell that to the woman who held awake for me," I said. Priya's mouth opened, closed. She looked away. "We can't base moral responsibility on the perceptions of dream entities," she said, and she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "They're not—" She trailed off because the cord glittered between us, solid as any evidence. We replicated with controls. Mara and I entered Mero again separately and compared notes. We found the same fountain, the same alley with the same broken lamp, the same bakery that smelled of anise. We each asked different people the same factual questions, names of streets, the price of bread, the length of their month, and got consistent answers. Priya, against her own caution, agreed to try. She insisted on rigorous protocol, no suggestive descriptions, no shared maps, blind targets. We gave ourselves different tasks: find a symbol, locate a building, ask for a specific phrase. The night Priya entered, she woke at 3 a.m. and called me with a voice I'd never heard from her, thin and shaken. "There's a woman," she said, "in an archive. She asked about you like you were a storm." "Sina," I whispered. Priya swallowed audibly. "She hated me," Priya said. "She said, 'Another one of you, another thief.' She asked me if you wake up smiling." Priya's voice cracked. "Elias, they're people. We should have published. We should have built a consortium called physicists, philosophers, theologians, national security. Instead, we hid because the world doesn't reward findings that sound like madness and because the ethical problem grew faster than the scientific one. Mero began to demand things. Not in a supernatural sense, but in the way any relationship demands. Show up, follow through, be accountable. Orin began to summon me whenever I appeared, dragging me into investigations about my own disappearance. He had built an entire file on me, witness statements, sketches, timelines of my vanishings. "You appear every few days," he said one night, tapping the notebook. "Sometimes you stay an hour, sometimes a night. Time between appearances is irregular. People plan around you and are disappointed. That makes you dangerous." "I'm not trying to be," I said. "Intent doesn't matter when you keep killing continuity," Orin said. He led me through Mero to a small building near the river, a place that smelled of lilies and old wood. Inside, candles burned around a simple box. A wake, my wake, again. People sat in silence, eyes red. Senya stood at the front, hands clenched, staring at the floor. When she saw me at the door, her knees buckled slightly as if her body couldn't decide between collapse and attack. A woman near the box shrieked and crossed herself. Someone shouted, "He's alive!" Another shouted, "It's a trick!" Orin grabbed my arm hard. "Look!" he hissed in my ear. "Look at what you do!" I looked. I watched people's grief turn to confusion, confusion to hope, hope to anger. I watched Senya's face twist as she fought the humiliation of having mourned me publicly, only for me to stroll in like a man late to dinner. I felt something inside me crack, not my skepticism, but my self-image. In my waking life, I was the rational one, the stable one, the man whose science gave him permission to observe without being implicated. In Mero, I was an ethical disaster. I stepped toward Senya. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words felt pathetic. Senya's eyes blazed. "Stop saying that," she whispered. "Stop apologizing like you drop a plate. People don't apologize for funerals." I flinched. Orin's grip tightened. "Do you understand now why I called it a case?" he said. "Because you are not just missing. You are missing in a way that wounds." That night, back in my waking bed, I didn't go to the lab. I went to the Ethics Review Board office at the university, stood in the hallway staring at the door, and realized with a sick twist of irony that there was no IRB protocol for hurting a parallel world. In my field, we debate whether animals dream, whether fetuses feel pain, whether artificial intelligences deserve moral consideration. We had no language for a place that only existed when we slept but continued when we didn't. I tried to talk to Daniel Alvarez, a psychiatrist who consulted on our sleep disorder studies. I framed it carefully, as if discussing a hypothetical. If there were a population of conscious beings accessible only through altered states, I said, and interacting with them caused them distress because of discontinuity, what would our responsibility be? Alvarez watched me with a clinician's stillness. "Are you asking as a philosopher," he said, "or as a patient?" The question landed like a slap. "As a scientist," I said stiffly. Alvarez nodded slowly. "Responsibility depends on agency," he said. "If you can choose to enter, and you know entry causes harm, then you have responsibility. If you cannot choose, you have less. But you're asking because you feel guilty, which means you believe you have some agency." He leaned forward. "Elias, are you sleeping?" I laughed bitterly. "Too much," I lied, because how could I say I was sleeping into another world? Alvarez's eyes narrowed. "Hallucinations often arise from sleep deprivation," he said gently. "So does paranoia. So does—" "Stop!" I snapped. "I'm not imagining this." Alvarez held up his hands. "I'm not accusing," he said. "I'm trying to keep you alive." Alive. As if being alive in one world didn't imply being absent in another. My colleagues began to notice the unraveling. I missed meetings. I forgot emails. I stared through conversations as if listening to a voice in another room. I began to carry the cord from Sena under my sleeve like a talisman and a shackle. Priya tried to cover for me at first, then stopped when it became clear I was dragging her into something that could destroy her too. "You need boundaries," she told me one afternoon, standing in my office doorway. "Mero or not, you're not functioning." "I can't stop," I said, and the confession tasted like addiction. Priya's face tightened. "You can," she said. "People stop dreaming all the time. Medication, sleep suppression, therapy. You can choose to reduce REM. "And if I do," I said, voice low, "what happens to Sena?" Priya's eyes flickered with something like jealousy, then quickly became clinical. "Sena is not your responsibility," she said, and the lie was too clean. Mara, meanwhile, was the only one who seemed to understand that the moral weight was the point, not a side effect. She began to speak of Mero people the way she spoke of our participants, with respect, with caution, with the awareness that observation is intrusion. "We need consent," she said. "We need to tell them what we are. We need to ask if they want us there." How do you ask a city if it wants your dreams? I said, exhausted. Mara's eyes were bright with determination. You start with the people you've already harmed, she said. You start with Senna. So I did. The next time I arrived in Mero, I went straight to the archive and found Senna at her desk, jaw tight, hands moving through papers with the fury of someone trying to outrun grief. She didn't look up when I approached. You're back, she said flatly. Yes, I said. My voice felt like sand. Senna, I need to ask you something and you can say no. That got her attention. She looked up slowly, and in her eyes I saw the wary amusement of someone who has watched me flail at morality. Ask, she said. I took a breath. Do you want me to come here? I said. Knowing I will vanish? Knowing it will hurt? Do you want me anyway, or do you want me to stop trying? Senna stared at me for a long time. In the quiet, the archive's paper rustled like leaves. Finally, she said, I want you to be real. I am, I said desperately. No, she snapped. I want you to be real in the way that means you can be counted on, in the way that means you don't make people invent rituals to survive you. Her voice softened. But wanting doesn't change what you are. She stood, walked around the desk, and placed her hand on my chest as if feeling for a heartbeat. When you vanish, she said, I feel like I've been widowed by a storm. I can't be angry at weather forever, but I can choose not to build my house under a cliff. Tears slid down her face finally, silent and furious. So here is my answer. If you can find a way not to vanish, come. If you cannot, then stop. Let me grieve once instead of every week. The clarity of it broke something in me because it removed the romantic possibility that love could excuse harm. Orin found me later that night and told me the watch had received reports of people vanishing near where I appeared, not into my world, but into nothing. Citizens who fell asleep and could not be woken, eyes open but empty, bodies breathing as if waiting for a mind to return. It's like they've been stolen, Orin said, and for the first time his anger aimed not at me, but at the phenomenon itself. It happens around you, he said. Not always, but enough. My skin went cold. In my waking lab, we had seen comas, sleep disorders, cataplexy. Here in Mero, sleep itself was becoming pathological, near me. I'm doing that, I whispered. Orin's eyes were bleak. I don't know, he said. But when you come, the world frays. He handed me a folded paper. This is from the Continuity Commission, he said. They formed a committee. They want to regulate you. I unfolded it. The script translated in my mind as if my brain were betraying my own language. It was a summons. Attend, explain, submit to oversight. The last line was a threat. Failure to comply would be treated as harm to the public. They're going to arrest me, I said. Orin shrugged. Maybe, he said. Maybe they'll just ask questions you can't answer. But either way, your novelty is over. You're now a problem with paperwork. The next morning I woke with a new problem in my waking world. Someone had been using my email account overnight. I knew because my phone showed sent messages I didn't remember writing, short, clipped emails to Priya and Mara and even Alvarez, requesting materials analysis on unknown fiber and access to sleep deprivation protocols, and one chilling line to the department chair. I request temporary leave for health reasons, effective immediately. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Sleepwalking, I told myself. Automatic behavior. But the phrasing was wrong. Too blunt. Too formal in a way I wasn't. Priya called me within an hour. Why did you email the chair at 3 a.m., she demanded. I didn't, I said, voice thin. Silence. Then Priya said slowly, Elias, come to the lab. Now. When I arrived, Mara and Priya and Alvarez were waiting in the conference room, faces set in a mixture of concern and frustration that made my stomach twist. On the table lay printouts, my midnight emails, my EEG data, a timeline of my missed appointments. We need to talk, Priya said. Alvarez watched me like a hawk. Are you dissociating? Alvarez asked. Are you losing time? I opened my mouth to deny, then closed it because the evidence on my phone contradicted denial. I don't remember last night, I admitted. Mara's eyes flicked to Priya, then back to me. Elias, she said carefully. When you were in Mero, did anyone talk about crossing? I thought of Orin's file, of the comatose sleepers, of the way the world frayed. They talk about me vanishing, I said. They talk about missing persons and funerals. Alvarez leaned forward. You are under severe stress, he said. You are sleep-deprived. You are experiencing vivid dreams and possibly parasomnias. It is treatable. It's not just parasomnia, Mara whispered. Priya shot her a look that could slice. Mara, Priya warned. Mara pressed on anyway. The cord, she said. The dust. The shared word. Priya saw it too. Alvarez's gaze sharpened. Priya? He asked. Priya's jaw clenched. I had an anomalous dream, she said stiffly. Alvarez looked from her to me. Anomalous, he repeated. This is how it spreads, he said quietly. And the word spreads made me feel like a pathogen. Elias, you need to stop experimenting on yourself, Priya said. You need sleep hygiene. You need to stop dragging the lab into your personal... It's not personal, I snapped. It's a discovery. It's consciousness. It's obsession, Priya countered. Alvarez held up a hand. We can do a monitored sleep study, he said. In the lab, full polysomnography video, closed loop. We can see if you're sleepwalking, if you're writing emails, if you're... He paused, then said the word carefully. If you're entering Mero. The fact that he said it, even cautiously, made my throat tighten. Priya looked horrified that he'd conceded the name. Mara looked relieved. And if I am? I asked. Alvarez's eyes were grave. Then we have a new category of phenomenon, he said. And you are still a human brain in a human body that can break. The monitored study began that night. I lay in the lab's sleep suite, electrodes glued to my scalp, EOG pads near my eyes, EMG on my chin, ECG on my chest. Cameras watched me from corners. Priya sat behind the glass with Mara, staring at monitors. Alvarez sat too, arms crossed. They had set up a closed-loop tax protocol to attempt to disrupt REM at onset, not to harm me, but to see if the Mero dream was tied to specific oscillatory patterns. If it were internal, altering the pattern might alter the content. If it were external, perhaps it would resist or show something else. I fell asleep faster than I expected, exhaustion knocking me out like anesthesia. I arrived in Mero in the watch office again, standing in a doorway as if dropped there. Orin was waiting, as if he'd anticipated my return. His eyes narrowed. You look worse, he said. You're fraying. I'm being watched, I said, and the absurdity of saying it in a dream world office made me almost laugh. Good, Orin said, without humor. Maybe someone will finally hold you accountable. He led me through streets toward a large building I hadn't seen before, its facade carved with repeating patterns like waves. Inside, a council chamber buzzed with voices. People sat at long tables, papers spread before them, quills scratching. At the center stood a woman with silver hair bound tight, her posture rigid with authority. She looked at me as if I were a disease. Eli, she said, or whatever you are. The Continuity Commission has questions. They asked me where I went. They asked me if I could choose to stay. They asked me if I was a man, a spirit, a curse. I answered as honestly as I could. Another world, sleep, no control. Their skepticism sounded familiar, my colleagues in another accent. Convenient, one commissioner scoffed. You harm us without intent, so you claim innocence. Intent matters, I said, surprising myself by arguing like Alvarez. But harm matters too, the silver-haired woman replied, so we must regulate you. She slid a document across the table. You will wear an anchor, she said, a tether. When you begin to vanish, it will activate. What does it do? I asked. It keeps you, she said simply. My stomach lurched. By force? By necessity, she said. Orin stood behind me silent. Senna sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, eyes downcast. She looked up when I glanced at her, and in her gaze I saw both hope and fear. Sina, I whispered. Sina swallowed. If you can stay, she said softly, stay. The commissioners brought out a device. A band of metal and fiber, like a cuff. embedded with something that looked like a small lattice of crystals. They called it a loom, a continuity loom. It resonates with the fold, the silver-haired woman said, using their term for sleep. When you begin to slip, it will weave you back. Weave me back into what? I asked. Into here, she said, impatient. Into the only world that will hold you accountable. Orin's hand landed on my shoulder, heavy. If you're telling the truth, he murmured, then staying will save us from grief. He hesitated, then added, and it will save you from being a murderer by accident. The word murderer made my vision swim. In the lab behind the glass, Priya's voice crackled faintly through the intercom they'd installed to talk to me in lucid REM. Elias, she said, voice tense, your REM signature is abnormal. There's a coherence pattern we don't recognize. We're applying stimulation now. In marrow, the air around me shimmered. The loom cuff touched my wrist. It was cold and heavy. The moment it clasped, I felt a pull in my skull, like two magnets aligning. The static that usually preceded waking surged, then snapped back as if caught in a net. My vision darkened at the edges. I stumbled. Sina half rose from her chair. Eli? She said, alarmed. The silver-haired woman watched with satisfaction. It's working, she said. In my waking body, I must have twitched because I heard muffled shouts from the lab, distant like voices through water. The stimulation intensified, my scalp tingling as tacks flooded my cortex with rhythm. In marrow, my senses distorted. The council chamber's walls pulsed, the commissioners' faces blurred into other faces, Priya's, Mara's, Alvarez's, then snapped back. I clutched the table to stay upright. Orin's grip tightened. Stay, he hissed. Stay. The static surged again, then receded. For the first time since Mero began, the usual transition did not complete. I did not wake. I remained in Mero, sweating, shaking, heart pounding. The commissioners murmured. Sina's hand flew to her mouth. Orin exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. You see, he said, you can stay. In the lab, I later learned, my REM had extended far beyond normal, my brain locked in a strange hybrid state. Priya had been both terrified and exhilarated. Alvarez had called it dangerous. Mara had called it a door. In Mero, the Continuity Commission called it proof that I could be held. They took me to a small room in the council building and stationed guards at the door. You will remain here until we decide terms, the silver-haired woman said. You will not leave your victims behind again. I sat on the floor with my back against cold stone and tried to breathe. In my waking life, my body lay on a lab bed with electrodes and cameras. In Mero, I was imprisoned for a crime that might be physiology. Hours passed. I did not wake. Panic began to creep in, not just for myself, but for my waking body. Extended REM without breaks can destabilize. Deprivation of deep sleep can cause cognitive collapse. If I stayed too long, my waking body could die. And if my waking body died, what would that mean? Would I become a permanent resident of Mero? Would that be salvation or exile? Would my death in one world be the only way to stop murdering the other? Sena visited under guard that evening, slipping into the room like a shadow. She knelt in front of me, eyes searching my face. You're still you, she said, voice trembling with cautious relief. You didn't vanish. Not yet, I said, and the words tasted like dread. Sena's brow furrowed. Why do you look scared? She asked. I swallowed. Because staying might kill me, I said. Sena blinked, not understanding. If you stay here, I said, my body there might die. In my world, the place you call my dream. Sena's face went pale. Then don't stay, she whispered. They'll force me, I said. Sena looked toward the door where guards stood, then back to me. Eli, she said urgently, tell me the truth. When you vanish, do you choose it? I shook my head. No, I said. Sena's eyes filled. Then they're wrong, she whispered fiercely. They're punishing you for a tide. She reached for my hands. We have to get you out. How? I asked, bitter. Sena's mouth tightened. There are people who understand the fold, she said. Not like you, not like your machines, but like threads, saints, the ones who walk between. She hesitated, then said, Ibarra. The name hit me like déjà vu, even though I hadn't heard it. A mystic? I guessed. Sina nodded. Orin hates her, she said, which means she might help. Ibarra came the next night, slipping past guards with an ease that suggested either bribery or something stranger. She was older than Sina, hair shaved close, eyes like dark water. She wore strings of small objects around her neck, bones, beads, bits of metal that clinked softly as she moved. She sat cross-legged in front of me and looked at my face with a calm that felt invasive. You are a gap, she said. Her voice was low, almost tender. A tear in the cloth. You come in like a needle and leave a hole. I don't mean to, I said. Ibarra shrugged. Meaning is a story, she said. Holes don't care. She reached out and touched the loom cuff on my wrist. They think this holds you, she said. It holds something, but not what they think. What does it hold? I asked. Ibarra smiled without joy. It holds the swap, she said. I frowned. Swap? Ibarra leaned closer. When you vanish from here, she said, you do not become nothing. You go somewhere. But do you think the place you go is empty while you are here? My stomach tightened. I don't understand, I said. Ibarra's eyes were pitying. There is always balance, she said. When you come, something else goes. When you leave, something else returns. The cloth does not tear without pulling a thread from somewhere. A cold realization crept over me, slow and horrifying. The emails, the missing time, the feeling that my own phrasing had been wrong. You mean, I whispered. Ibarra nodded. Someone wears your skin when you are gone, she said simply. Someone from here. My mouth went dry. That's impossible, I said automatically, scientist reflex. Ibarra tilted her head. Is your being here possible? She asked. The question landed like a stone. Ibarra reached into her pouch and pulled out a thin strand of fiber, dark like Sina's cord. We can follow threads, she said. We can tie what slips. But you must choose. Do you want to keep swapping and killing each other by waking, or do you want to cut the thread and let one world lose you? Killing each other, I echoed, dizzy. Ibarra's gaze was steady. When you wake, she said, you throw someone out of your skin. When you sleep, she said, you throw yourself out of theirs. You call it dreaming. We call it possession. Either way, someone is abandoned. The room seemed to tilt. I thought of my waking partner, Leah, who had complained lately that I spoke in my sleep with a voice she didn't recognize. I'd laughed it off. I thought of the odd purchases on my credit card. A used lock-picking set, a book on Merrow's equivalent of geography I'd never ordered, a cheap prepaid phone. I thought of the email to the department chair requesting leave. Strategic, not frantic. Someone had been planning. Who? I whispered. Ibarra smiled slightly. Ask your detective, she said. Orin knows more than he admits. The next time Orin visited, I watched him differently. He carried his notebook as always, posture tense, anger held like a weapon. They're going to decide your terms, he said curtly. The commission thinks you can be integrated if you accept restrictions. Orin, I said quietly. He paused. What? He snapped. I swallowed. When I vanish, I said, do I vanish completely? Do you ever find a body? Orin's eyes narrowed. Bodies don't vanish, he said. People do. Answer, I said, and my tone surprised me. Authority. Born not of rank but of desperation. Orin's jaw worked. Finally, he said, sometimes there are sleepers. They're like husks, breathing, eyes open. They don't respond. Near me, I said. Orin's gaze flicked away. Yes, he admitted. And? I pressed. Orin's fingers tightened on his notebook. And sometimes, he said reluctantly, those sleepers wake later and don't remember who they were. They remember other places. My heart hammered. Like my place, I whispered. Orin's eyes snapped back to mine, and in them I saw something that wasn't anger. It was fear. You know, I said, you know about swapping. Orin's face hardened. I know nothing, he said. I know you harm us. Do you know you harm me? I asked. Orin's mouth twitched. You're not harmed, he scoffed. You wake in comfort, you live. I leaned forward. My life is unraveling, I said. Someone uses my body when I'm asleep. Someone sends emails I don't remember. Someone makes plans. Is that you? Oren's eyes widened a fraction, then narrowed. You're paranoid, he said too quickly. Ibarra's voice echoed in my mind. Ask your detective. I pushed. When I vanish, I said, do you dream? Oren's nostrils flared. Everyone dreams, he snapped. Do you dream of a place with white walls and humming machines? I asked. Oren froze. The silence between us stretched so tight I could hear my own breath. Then very softly, Oren said, I have been in your world. The confession landed like a gunshot. My stomach lurched. Oren's eyes were haunted now, anger stripped away. I have stood in a bright room, he whispered, with wires on my skin. I have seen your people looking at me through glass. I have heard my own voice in a language that felt like stones in my mouth. I have walked your streets where people stare at little glowing rectangles and never look at each other. I have worn your name like a mask. He swallowed hard. I have searched for you there. My throat closed. You've been in my body, I whispered. Oren's gaze held mine. When you vanish from here, he said, I wake there, in you, and when you return, I am ripped back like a hook in my ribs. He laughed bitterly. Do you know what it feels like to be murdered by morning? My vision blurred with tears I didn't expect. I didn't know, I whispered again, and this time the words were not apology but horror. Oren's mouth twisted. Of course you didn't, he said, echoing the man at my wake. Because you were gone. I sat back against the stone wall, shaking. In my waking world, I had been agonizing over whether waking up abandoned Mero. In Mero, Oren was telling me waking up killed him, killed his access to my world, killed the version of him that had been wearing my skin, living my life, leaving traces. The ethical question doubled and twisted. If waking expelled Oren, if sleeping expelled me, then every transition was violence. Consciousness was not a private movie. It was a territory we were invading. Why did you do it? I whispered. Oren's face crumpled with exhaustion. Because you didn't come back, he said. Because Sena cried until her throat bled. Because the city held funerals for a man who was not dead but was absent. Because the commission threatened to burn the archive if Sena kept defending you. Because I needed answers and the only lead was you. He looked away. And because when I woke in your world wearing your face, I realized something. You have machines that can watch the fold. You have ways to hold the door open. So I used your hands to build what we needed. Cold spread through me. The loom, I whispered. Oren nodded. Your lab, he said. Your wires, your stimulation. I learned enough in the hours I had. I sent emails. I moved pieces. I made allies. Allies? I echoed. Oren's gaze returned to mine, and there was a strange softness there now, almost regret. Your colleague, he said. Priya. My breath caught. No, I said. Oren's lips pressed together. She dreams of Mero, he said. She stands in our streets with the look of someone who thinks she's hallucinating. I followed her once in your world. She lives alone. She has a cabinet of tea and books and a knife by her bed. He shook his head. You don't know your own world as well as you think. My mind raced. Priya had been on edge. Priya had warned me about spread. Priya had also insisted on controlled replication. Had she been manipulated? Had Oren as me contacted her? The thought made my skin crawl. Why are you telling me this? I asked, voice ragged. Oren's shoulders slumped. Because I am tired, he said. Because this swap is tearing both worlds. Because the commission will decide soon, and their loom will trap you here, and then I will stay there. He looked at me, eyes dark. Do you understand? If you cannot, vanish, then I will not be ripped out of your skin anymore. I will have continuity. I will have a life in your world. And you will be stuck here to answer for what you've done. The room seemed to close in. That's your plan, I whispered. Oren didn't deny it. It's justice, he said. But his voice shook, and I realized he was terrified too. Terrified of being trapped. Terrified of being the murderer instead of the murdered. And Sena? I demanded, anger flaring through my fear. Does she know you're going to steal my life? Oren's face tightened. Sina wants you to stay, he said. She doesn't care about your other world except as the place that takes you. I flinched because he was right. Sina's answer had been clear. If you can't stay, stop coming. Oren was offering a brutal version of staying. Trap me, free him. I thought of Leah, my waking partner, waking up beside a man with my face but Oren's mind. Would she notice? Would he care? Would he be kind or desperate? I thought of my lab, my students, my work. Oren would wear it like a costume. He would use my access, my authority, my body, and each morning I would remain in Merrow, held by a loom, facing a commission that believed I could choose. You can't, I said, voice shaking with fury. You can't take my life. Oren's eyes flashed. You took ours, he snapped, with every vanishing. We stared at each other, two men bound by a seam in reality, each convinced the other was the thief. The next morning in the lab, I woke because the loom hadn't activated fully yet, because my body still knew the path, and I woke to chaos. Priya stood over me, face pale, eyes wide. Mara hovered behind her, hands trembling. Alvarez was on the phone, voice urgent. He's awake, Priya said, and her relief sounded like grief. Elias, what happened? Your REM lasted 47 minutes. You were non-responsive to stimulation. We thought... She broke off, swallowing hard. We thought you might not come back. I sat up, ripping electrodes loose. My scalp burned. Oren, I said hoarsely. His name is Oren. Priya stared. Who? The detective, I said. He's been in my body. The words sounded insane in the fluorescent light, but Priya's face drained of color, as if something in her recognized them. The man with the notebook, she whispered, and I realized she had seen him too. Mara made a small sound, half sob, half laugh. So it's true, she breathed. Alvarez slammed the phone down. Enough, he said sharply. This is dangerous. Elias, you are dissociating. You are attributing your behavior to a person, I snapped. A real person, who has been using my body at night to build a trap. Alvarez's eyes were hard now. You need to be evaluated, he said. Immediately. No, I said, and I swung my legs off the bed, dizzy. Priya stepped in front of me. Elias, she said urgently, listen, if what you're saying is even partly true, then you can't fight it alone. You're exhausted. You're being pulled between... She stopped, looked at me with a naked fear I'd never seen in her. Between worlds, she finished, voice small. We have to slow down, Mara pleaded. We have to stop him, I said. And my voice was not the voice of a man writing a paper. It was the voice of a man trying to prevent a coup of his own body. I stumbled out of the sleep suite, ignoring Alvarez's shout, ignoring Priya's hand on my arm. I drove home on autopilot, hands shaking on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with notifications. Messages from Leah asking where I was, from the chair acknowledging my request for leave, from the university health office scheduling an appointment I hadn't made. Oren had been busy. In my apartment, I tore through drawers and found things that weren't mine. A small brass key, a folded piece of paper with Merrow script, a prepaid phone with one contact labeled simply S. My stomach flipped. Sina. Oren had been contacting Sina from my world using my hands. I dialed the prepaid phone. It rang once, then connected. A woman's voice answered, breath-catching. Eli? Sina whispered, and hearing her through a real phone line snapped something in me. Sina, I said, voice breaking. It's me. It's Elias. I'm awake. Silence. Then Sina said carefully, You sound different. Cold dread slid down my spine. Oren called you, I said. Sina's breath hitched. Yes, she whispered. He said he was you. He said he found a way. Rage flared. Sina, I said urgently, listen to me. Oren is planning to trap me in Merrow. He will take my life here. He will... Stop, Sina said, voice sharp. Stop talking like Merrow is a thing you can abandon and return to. You don't know what it's been like. I do, I said desperately. I've seen the wakes. You've seen moments, Sina snapped. You've seen the scars you leave and then you vanish before you have to live with them. Her voice shook. Oren didn't vanish. Oren stayed. Oren held people when they cried. Oren did the work you never do because you leave. If Orin can keep you here, she stopped, swallowed. If Orin can keep you here, then maybe we can finally stop burying you. And what about Leah? I blurted, and the name felt obscene in Sena's mouth. Sena went silent. Who is Leah? She asked. My throat tightened. Someone here, I said. Someone in my world who loves me, or thinks she does. Sena exhaled, a sound like pain. So you have someone too, she whispered. So you know what it is to wait. Yes, I said. So don't let Orin steal my life. Don't let him become me. Sena's voice was small now. Maybe you don't understand, she said. Maybe you've never been only half in your own life. Tears slid down my face, hot and helpless. Sena, I said, if he traps me, I will die here. My body might die. And Orin will wear it. That's not justice. That's another theft. Sena's breathing was ragged. I don't know what is right, she whispered. Every answer is a wound. The line went dead. I stood in my apartment holding the phone to my ear long after the call ended, listening to the flat tone as if it were a verdict. That night I tried not to sleep. I paced. I drank coffee until my hands shook. I stared at my bed like it was a trap. But exhaustion is a predator that waits you out. Around dawn, my vision blurred, and the taste of metal filled my mouth, and I knew Mero was coming for me, whether I consented or not. I woke, or arrived, in Mero already running, as if my dream body had picked up my waking panic. I bolted through streets toward the council building, toward the room where the loom waited, toward Orin. Guards shouted. People turned. The city felt sharper, more real than ever, as if urgency increased resolution. I burst into the chamber where the Continuity Commission sat. The silver-haired woman looked up, displeased. You are not scheduled, she snapped. Orin stood at the side, notebook in hand, eyes unreadable. Sena sat at the far end, face drawn. Ibarra stood in a corner like a shadow, watching. You can't do this! I shouted, and my voice echoed against stone. You can't trap me! The chamber erupted in murmurs. The silver-haired woman's eyes narrowed. You agreed, she said. You promised. I promised because you threatened me, I said. And because you don't understand what you're trapping. Orin stepped forward. We understand enough, he said quietly. We understand grief. I turned on him. You've been in my body, I said, and gasps rippled through the room. You've been using my life like a tool. You've been sending emails. You've been contacting Sena. You're going to steal my world. Orin's face tightened. Your world, he repeated, and contempt laced the words. You speak of worlds like property. I speak of consent, I snapped. You can't wear my skin without... You wore ours, Orin cut in, voice rising, and the chamber went silent under the force of his fury. He pointed at me with the pencil like a weapon. You came here and spoke to people and touched them and made promises and then vanished. You inhabited a life you could not hold. You call that dreaming. We call it violation. I opened my mouth, then closed it because he was not wrong. Sena stood abruptly. Stop, she said, voice shaking. She looked at Orin, then at me. This isn't a trial, she said. This is desperation pretending to be justice. The silver-haired woman's jaw clenched. We have a duty to protect our citizens, she said. If this man's coming, phrase the fold, then keeping him is protection. And if keeping him kills someone else, Sena demanded, and her eyes flashed to Ibarra, who nodded slightly. Murmurs rose again, uneasy. The silver-haired woman frowned. What do you mean? She asked sharply. Ibarra stepped forward. The loom does not just hold him, she said calmly. It holds the swap. The commissioners stared at her. There is balance, Ibarra continued. When he is here, someone from here is there. When he is there, someone from there is here. You do not trap him without trapping the other. Orin's face went pale. That's not, he began. Ibarra's gaze cut him off. You know it, she said softly. You have worn his skin. Orin's hands clenched into fists. Yes, he spat. And I will again, because someone has to stop this. He turned to the commissioners, voice urgent. Keep him, he said. Keep him and the swap ends. I will stay there. He will stay here. 2 worlds get continuity. The silver-haired woman's eyes gleamed with grim satisfaction. That seems efficient, she said. Sena's face contorted. At what cost? She whispered. Orin looked at her, and for a moment the detective's hardness cracked. At the cost we've already been paying, he said. At the cost of grief. At the cost of being murdered by morning. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. You think I want your life? He whispered. I want a world where my people don't hold funerals for you. If stealing your continuity is what it takes, then yes. I will be the villain in your story if it means my city can stop bleeding. The chamber felt like it was closing around me, two worlds' ethics converging into a vice. I looked at Sena, her eyes pleaded, not for one outcome, but for mercy. I looked at Ibarra. She watched me with calm sorrow, as if she already knew no clean choice existed. And in the back of my skull I felt the static, the tide pulling. Morning in my waking world, or perhaps Orin's morning there. The loom on my wrist hummed faintly, like a living thing. Elias! Priya's voice suddenly crackled in my ear, and I realized with a jolt that the lab intercom was still connected, that my colleagues were listening to this argument through my REM speech or eye signals or some channel we didn't understand. Priya's voice was panicked. Elias, your brain is destabilizing, you're spiking, you have to wake up. Wake up. The command sounded like salvation and murder in the same breath. I looked at Orin. If I wake, I said hoarsely, I throw you out of my body. I kill your continuity. Orin's jaw tightened. Yes, he said. And if you stay, I said, you throw me out of mine. You kill mine. Orin's eyes burned. Maybe you deserve it, he whispered. And the cruelty was only half conviction. I looked at Sena one last time. If I stop coming, I said, voice breaking, you can grieve once. Sena's lips trembled. And if you stay, she whispered. I swallowed. Then I abandon everyone else, I said, and Orin becomes me. Sena's eyes closed briefly, as if in prayer. When she opened them, they were fierce. Then choose neither theft, she said. Choose release. How? I whispered. Sena glanced at Ibarra. Ibarra stepped forward and pulled a small knife from her belt, its blade dull with age. Cut the thread, she said simply. End the swap. That's death, I said, and my voice was almost relieved because death at least was one world. Ibarra nodded. Or something like it, she said. The seam closes. You will no longer enter. Orin will no longer wear. Both worlds lose the bridge. Both worlds keep their people. Orin surged forward. No, he snarled. You don't get to choose escape. You don't get to wash your hands by dying. The guards moved, uncertain. The commissioners shouted. Chaos rose like a storm, and in that chaos I felt the loom tighten, activating as the static surged. The room blurred. My body began to vibrate. Sena grabbed my hands. Eli, she cried, voice raw. Don't vanish, don't! Orin lunged and seized my wrist, fingers locking around the loom cuff as if he could anchor himself to my leaving. The silver-haired woman shouted, Hold him! Guards grabbed my shoulders. Ibarra lifted the knife. Priya's voice in my ear was frantic. Elias, your heart rate, your oxygen, wake up, wake up! In that suspended second, I realized with terrible clarity that every option was violence except one, to make myself the casualty instead of making others, to refuse to keep swapping bodies like borrowed coats, to refuse to keep making promises across worlds. If consciousness was a traveler, then maybe the only ethical act was to stop traveling. I looked at Sena and tried to put an entire apology and gratitude into one glance. I looked at Orin and saw not a villain but a mirror. Someone trying to protect his world the way I'd tried to protect mine. Both of us willing to commit murder in the name of continuity. Ibarra's knife flashed. I did not stop her. The blade bit into the braided fiber of Sena's cord still on my wrist, the bead cold against skin. It sliced through not cloth but something deeper, something that made the air crackle. For an instant I felt both worlds at once. The lab's fluorescent glare and Merrow's amber lamplight, Leah's sleeping face and Sena's tear-streaked one, Priya's hands on a keyboard and Orin's fingers digging into my wrist. Then the seam snapped. I fell, not into sleep, not into waking, but into a silence so complete it felt like being outside time. There was no marrow, no lab, only the sensation of myself as a pattern unraveling. I thought absurdly of my lectures about the self as a narrative generated by the brain, and I realized how comforting those lectures had been because they implied the narrative belonged to one skull. Here, the narrative belonged to the seam between skulls. In that silence, a voice spoke, not aloud, not in language, but in the way a memory speaks when it rises. Who are you if you're not the traveler? I didn't have an answer. I had only images. Sena tying a cord, Orin's empty fist when I vanished, Mara's eyes wide at the fountain, Priya's face pale behind glass, Leah's text messages piling up unanswered. The images did not belong to one world. They belonged to a life split by sleep. The silence held me like water holds a sinking stone. Then, slowly, sound returned. A beep, a ventilator hiss, the smell of antiseptic. I opened my eyes. White ceiling. Hospital. My throat ached as if I'd been screaming. My wrist felt bare. I lifted my hand. No cord. No loom. Just skin. Relief flooded me so hard I sobbed. "Elias," someone said, and a face leaned over me. Priya. Her eyes were rimmed red. Mara stood behind her, crying openly. Alvarez stood farther back, arms folded, expression shaken. "You're awake," Priya whispered, and her voice broke. I tried to speak, but my throat rasped. Priya squeezed my hand. "You went into cardiac arrhythmia," she said shakily. "Your REM collapsed. We had to. She swallowed hard. "We thought we lost you." Lost me. The words echoed with Merrow's wakes. "Merrow," I croaked. Priya flinched. "It's gone," she whispered. "The signals, whatever coherence pattern, vanished when you flatlined. It's gone." Mara leaned in, eyes huge and wet. "Do you remember?" she whispered. "Do you remember them?" Tears slid down my temples into my hair. "Yes," I rasped. Priya's face contorted with grief. "We recorded everything," she whispered. "Your REM speech, your eye signals. There was, Elias, there was a voice." My blood went cold. "What voice?" I croaked. Priya swallowed. "Not yours," she said. "A second one. Sometimes you spoke in a different cadence, different word choice, like someone else using your mouth. Alvarez thought it was—" She glanced back at Alvarez, who looked away. "We thought it was dissociation," Priya continued. Until the monitors picked up something impossible. Two distinct patterns overlapping, like two people trying to drive the same body. My heart hammered. "Orin," I whispered, and saying his name in a hospital felt like summoning a ghost. Mara's face went white. "We heard that name," she whispered. "Over and over." Priya nodded, eyes shining with horror and awe. "When you flatlined," she said, "your mouth kept moving. Your eyes kept darting." The monitor showed. She broke off, shuddering. "It was like something didn't want to let go." I lay back against the pillow, shaking. "Did I end it?" I whispered. Priya nodded slowly. "The swap stopped," she said. "Whatever that means. Your email account has been quiet. No more nocturnal messages. No more—" She hesitated. "No more things in your apartment that aren't yours." Relief and grief tangled in my chest until I couldn't separate them. "So they're free," I whispered. "Merrow is free." "And you?" Mara asked, voice small. I stared at the ceiling, at the clean white tiles that suddenly looked like a blank page. Who was I without the seam? A scientist with an impossible data set and no way to replicate. A man with two loves I could never reconcile. A murderer who had chosen to die rather than keep killing, only to wake anyway. My throat tightened. "I don't know," I said honestly. Priya's hand squeezed mine. "Elias," she said, tears spilling now. "We can pretend it never happened. We can call it an episode. We can bury it. Bury it. Like a wake." I closed my eyes. In the dark behind my lids, I expected Merrow's amber light, the smell of smoke and cedar, Senya's face. There was only black, a clean severing. The loss hit like amputation. I opened my eyes again, gasping. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't bury them. They were real." Alvarez stepped closer finally, his clinician mask cracked. "Elias," he said softly, "if they were real, then you did the only thing you could." "Did I?" I whispered. "Or did I just abandon them permanently instead of intermittently?" No one answered because there was no answer that didn't bleed. Days passed. I was discharged. I went home to Leah's cautious embrace, to apologies I couldn't explain, to the crater my obsession had left in my career. The university put me on indefinite leave. Priya stopped returning my texts, not out of anger but out of fear, as if contact might reopen the seam. Mara tried to write it up as a theoretical paper and then deleted the file, terrified of what it would do to her life. I stopped dreaming of Mero. My sleep became shallow, ordinary, cruelly peaceful. The guilt did not fade, it simply lost its target. Without Mero, the ethical question became even sharper because there was no possibility of repair. If the dream world was real, then I had cut off an entire reality from our access, and I had done it to stop harm. Was that mercy or mass abandonment? I began to walk at night through my city, staring at windows lit in amber, imagining Mero's lamps behind them. Sometimes I would smell smoke and cedar and spin around, heart hammering, only to find a neighbor's fireplace. I tried therapy, I tried meditation, I tried to return to science, to write about sleep spindles and memory consolidation as if nothing had changed. The words felt like lies. Then, one evening, months later, I found a notebook in my desk drawer that I didn't remember placing there. It was small, leather-bound, the edges worn. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, in tight handwriting I recognized from Mero, were pages of notes. Orin's notes, drawings of my lab, a sketch of Leah's face, a list of dates, and on the last page, in my own language, 3 words written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. We found you. My blood turned to ice. I flipped the notebook over, searching for a hidden compartment, a trick. Nothing. The notebook was real. It smelled faintly of mineral water. I sat at my desk in the quiet apartment, listening to the refrigerator hum, and realized the seam hadn't closed cleanly. Orin had left a hook. Orin had left a thread. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then lit again with a new message. You cut the rope. We kept the knot. I stared, throat tight, as a third message appeared. Sina says you still owe her a name. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Leah called from the bedroom. Who is it? And her voice sounded like it came from a different life. I didn't answer. The phone buzzed again. One final message. Tonight, don't fight, sleep. Let me out. I sat perfectly still, the room suddenly too bright, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. The ethical question I'd tried to solve by severing the seam returned, sharper and more personal. If Orin could still reach into my world, then the swap could still happen, and every waking could still be murder. I went to the bathroom mirror and stared at my own face, searching for signs of another man behind it. My eyes looked tired, human, ordinary. Yet I remembered Orin's words. Do you know what it feels like to be murdered by morning? I thought of Sena saying, choose release. I thought of the Commission's cold efficiency. I thought of my own arrogance in believing I could end a phenomenon by cutting one thread. Maybe seams don't close, they migrate. I went back to my desk and opened Orin's notebook again, turning pages slowly. In the margins were symbols I recognized from the loom cuff, diagrams that looked disturbingly like the wiring schematics of our tax device. Orin had been learning. Orin had been building. And somewhere, in some plane I could no longer reach by dreaming alone, Mero was still continuing. People still living under amber windows, perhaps holding yet another wake for a man who had disappeared for good. Unless he hadn't disappeared. Unless tonight Orin would wear my skin again. My mouth went dry. The last line in the notebook beneath "We found you" was a sentence that hadn't been there when I first glanced. If you're reading this, it means I'm awake. The handwriting was mine. The phrasing was not. I felt a slow nausea crawl up my throat as the implication settled. I wasn't sure anymore which I had written the story you've just heard. I remembered Mero with my own memories, but memory is also a place you can trespass. I remembered guilt, but guilt can be inherited. I remembered waking in the lab, but waking is just one kind of arrival. The phone buzzed again, and when I looked down, the screen showed no new message, only the time, 3:17 a.m. And beneath it, as if typed by an invisible hand, a single word, sleep. My eyelids felt suddenly heavy,